I'm the producer, host, and animator of This Glorious Clockwork, a new YouTube channel about biochemistry, currently partnered up with BioCord. I am giving us just a couple of seconds of introduction just to make sure we have everyone file in. I understand that Zoom's a little bit goofy about how they let people in, so odds are, if you're hearing the sound of my voice, it's just bursting into your ears mid-sentence right now, which is pretty classic. Go Team Technology. Audience, I've got an incredible panel about entrepreneurship with some really brilliant minds in the life sciences research space. We've got a huge spread of experience across a lot of different levels of the entrepreneurship space, which is I think is very critical. A lot of our audience here today is either like in high school thinking about jumping into life sciences at university level, is currently studying in university, or is in that sort of grad school hell period where you're finally, locking in your niche in life sciences research, but don't necessarily know how to build a stable career. These people are the people you need to hear from in terms of figuring out your place, figuring out how you can best keep pushing the envelope forward in life sciences. This is one of the best times to be a life sciences student. We are on the cusp of so many different explosions in research, in development, and just it's a really big paradigm shift away from very traditional R&D, where your whole goal in life when I was a university student was to just get into pharma R&D and just hope for the best. With pharma R&D kind of losing efficiency now and the bioinformatics space on the rise, like genomics, computational biology, and understanding the data side of biology. Not only that, but a lot of different ways of life sciences processes and manufacturing as well. There's a lot of really amazing new places to find your place on the biotech side as you try to establish yourself as a life sciences professional. So I'm so excited to have all of our panelists here. I'm pretty sure I've vamped long enough for Zoom to let everyone in. So let's jump right into the panel and let's get some introductions out of the way. First and foremost on this panel, of course, we have Anchit Singh, who is the CEO and co-founder of BioCord, the entrepreneur who essentially helped start this amazing Discord server as well as this conference itself. Anchit, I know it's super late at night for you right now, but I really appreciate you being here with us today. What's good, man? How you feel about the conference so far? How do you feel about, this incredible community you've helped build so far?
Well, I'm biased, but I love the community and I love the conference that we've put together. And I think you're doing a great job hosting this panel. I believe we have a vast variety, like a really good range of people to speak about entrepreneurship and how people can start their companies and how the bio entrepreneurship the space entirely can develop and help humanity. So I think that's at least the grassroots community building that we're doing. I think having them experience having them share the experience of the various entrepreneurs here will be helpful.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's what's really cool about this too, is that we're going to get a lot of different angles about what it means to be an entrepreneur in this space, to be somebody who's helped pushing the envelope and develop new areas of study and develop new areas of development for life sciences, so that there can be an amazing diversity of careers in what used to be a very, very not limited but very focused profession. So it's really exciting to see all the different kinds of entrepreneurship that you see, like in computers, in software, and all that other stuff, sort of really expand into biology. And so at the front end of that, I'm really excited to have Dr. Tony Kalisa here, who is a founder and partner at Petrie, which is an awesome and really interesting fund that's finding a new approach for funding formation stage startups at the intersection of biology and engineering. They've helped establish a lot of really brilliant companies, and it's just really exciting to have somebody from that side, the funder side, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Tony Kalisa, really excited to have you here today. How you doing today, man? You ready for this panel to get going?
Hey, I'm doing great and glad to be here. And I hate to follow up on Anshid here, who's like in the lab. I mean, don't mess with that guy.
I was still in the lab, yes.
I mean, where else? There's no better place if you have to do a call late at night than doing it at the lab. Like it's bad doing it late at night, but it's amazing to make sure that you have that authority. Like, yeah, I'm here in the lab. What are you doing with your life? uh, let's keep rolling through. So we have Dr. Tony Kalisa, then we also have Christopher Lee, CEO and co-founder of BioBox Analytics. We have an actual honest to God founder in the genomic space, ladies and gentlemen. Really excited to have your perspective here, Christopher. Really excited to hear what it's like in the Google Cloud Accelerator for Canada as well. Like, you guys are in the upswing. You're doing incredible work. Christopher, what's good, man? You excited for this panel?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity. And it's an honor to be here with the rest of the panelists here today, and really excited to kind of chat a little bit more about something that, is very close to heart, startup and entrepreneurship in the life sciences space. It's definitely on the rise right now. We're seeing a lot of young scientists who have this ambition to kind of go forth and create something in our industry. And I think, as a community, we should definitely kind of give back and have this feed forward loop that we can continue to accelerate science together as a community.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I love hearing that entrepreneurial language as well. You've already got that. You've got that founder speak down pat, my dude. Really excited for it. And then with even more interesting perspectives as well, we also have Alexei Guzzi from New Scientist, who is just a really brilliant thinker in terms of how life sciences is done, where life sciences should be going, and how life sciences actually works. Alexei, you are an absolutely brilliant perspective in terms of figuring out the bleeding edge of life sciences. Delighted to have you here. What's good, man? How do you feel about this panel so far?
Hey, yeah, I'm doing great, and yeah, super excited to be here. In contrast to Anshit, I'm taking a day off today, so I guess I'm not as hardcore. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm super happy to have observed the development of BioCord over the last year, and yeah, super exciting.
Yeah, as somebody who's been partnered with BioCord since day one, I've also been overjoyed watching this community grow. From basically, I was one of the first 100 people who joined, now up to 14,000. So go you, people listening to this panel, for helping build the life sciences community on Discord. I mean, there's a reason we're discord.gg/biology. So it's been really exciting having this growth and being at this bleeding edge of this community. But with all that bleeding edge stuff out of the way, it's also important in an entrepreneurship panel to make sure that you have, some established knowledge as well, which is why we are overwhelmingly excited to have Dr. John Moulton of GeneTools.com. Yeah, exactly. Of GeneTools.com here, who has been, an entrepreneur in the life sciences space for over 20 years now as well. And so has been through all the various stages of development as, biotechnology has grown and developed over this century. I shouldn't say this century, but over the last 20 years, which has been a deeply exciting time. And it's really awesome having somebody who has established a foundational process that has managed to stay consistent for that level of time. If you watch the entrepreneurial space at all, especially in the life sciences, you see how quickly a lot of these life sciences companies grow up, flare out, and go away. And so it's really awesome to have a company and a process that's managed to last through like a lot of different really goofy market cycles, as well as a lot of different incredible technological cycles. So Dr. John Moulton, I'm so excited to have your perspective here today, man. How you doing today? You excited for this panel?
Oh, it's good to be here.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, folks. So just getting into the foundations here. So I want to see how folks are feeling about how they establish their processes. That's the first thing. When a lot of the students here are asking questions, they always ask, how do I even get started here? What is the game I'm trying to play? And for people who are asking questions in Discord, no, you cannot see me. I don't have a webcam. I'm one of those fancy animators who built their own computer and neglected to buy a webcam. So I am just the faceless voice just kind of like dripping into this conference. So forgive me for that. You don't need to see my face. You just need to hear the questions I'm asking. I'm not important. Our panelists are. But getting into the foundational side here, as we think about the beginnings of entrepreneurial journeys, I'm going to bring it back to Dr. Tony Kalisa. Dr. Kalisa, it's really interesting seeing Petrie right now. Like, you've just established the next pillar fund. So I'm really curious, like, what's going on in funding right now in terms of like what kinds of startups are getting funded like in Q3 2021? What's sort of like the landscape you see as people are in this like pre-seed and seed stage of their funding for biotech and bioengineering? Like, what's happening right now? Like, what's the really high level view as people start thinking about finding their place as they develop themselves in a life sciences career?
That's a great question. I mean, the way that I think we've always thought about things at Petrie and how I've just generally approached life is to just like try and work on the problems that are the most important, regardless of like how much attention there's currently around them. And I think biotech in general, right, has emerged as one of the kind of most exciting fields, and it's getting a ton of attention. But like, now you think about how do you apply that towards problems, the natural place that people go to is therapeutics. And we do a lot of that at Petrie. And, clearly with an aging population in most Western countries and, anyway, there's a lot of medical issues. I don't have to expand on them, but one area where we think like there are like really important problems where there is like considerably less funding and attention is on sustainability and on climate. So actually the last few investments that we've made in Petrie actually are in what I'll call broadly biosustainability. People that are thinking about how we can live sustainably in terms of the way that we eat or consume, as well as even just direct capture of carbon out of the air. And I think that's an area where we're going to be continuing to spend a lot of time. So, in terms of the average age of the people listening to this call, it seems like, from what I've heard so far, pretty young. And so, when you think about your career, if you're 20 years old right now, I mean, you've got 50 years in front of you. Like, where's the world going to be 30 years from now? Like, what are the really important problems going to be? I think climate's going to be one of them.
And do you think there's and based on what you've been seeding so far, do you see like a lot of interest in sort of the life sciences approach to carbon capture? Like, are you funding like a lot of cyanobacteria startups or whatever? Or that was more of a joke than anything else? Like, what are you seeing in terms of people thinking about the bioengineering side of carbon capture? Is it mostly finding new and interesting ways to engineer life forms that capture carbon, or are there other ways we can think about biosustainability? If you can give us just like a very, very high level look of that moving forward.
Well, I think there's basically two vectors, and we funded companies in both areas in the past 6 months or so. One of them is how we can basically produce the things that we want more sustainably. So, for example, we recently invested in a company called Compound Foods, which is producing coffee. It's like, you can imagine it kind of like the Impossible Foods of coffee. The other side of this is actually just direct carbon capture, and biological systems are kind of specifically enabling in this because of how scalable they are. And so this is an area where we'd like to be making more investments. And if anyone has ideas there, please get in touch. But yeah, I think like they could take many forms, Peter.
No, that's lovely. And audience, thank you so much for your questions. And audience, thank you so much for your feedback. I will try to make sure that I'm not so breathlessly excited for this panel that I speak too fast for people in the actual audience to understand me. So as always, leave that feedback both on you've got the Zoom chat, you've also got it within BioCord itself. Audience, you've got the summer conference questions channel. Those are the two places where we'll be able to directly interface as we ask these questions. So moving from the founder side real fast and getting introductions here, I'd love to see the perspective from the entrepreneurial side on the actual business side. So Christopher Lee, CEO and co-founder of BioBox Analytics, you've just recently entered the Google Cloud Accelerator, and so you're finally hitting that inflection point where your processes are getting, not to forgive the pun, but literally accelerated. So as you've established this process, like out of curiosity, on this more bioinformatics side, like what is it like as an entrepreneur here? Like, what is it like solving these kinds of problems where it's more, you're living within data itself as opposed to in the laboratory? Take me through BioBox Analytics real fast and take me through like the kinds of problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah. So thanks for that question. And a little bit about us. At BioBox Analytics, we're working to bridge the gap between biology and bioinformatics. And for us, it's a vision that every researcher, scientist in training has access to the tools that they need to conduct analysis from start to finish. And ultimately, we're here to help research teams collaborate more effectively. And so, in terms of where we are right now with working in bioinformatics and where we are as a business, I think in terms of processes, where we're starting to really narrow down and optimize is trying to understand how to effectively communicate with our clients, to understand their needs and to be able to really deliver on our goal to be able to accelerate science and help these research teams. And I think, for those of us who are, listening today, who are interested in, building a company in the future or pursuing this entrepreneurship route, one of the major things is you need to understand is, who are you looking to sell to? What your solution that you're creating, the problem you're solving, who is it that's going to be leveraging the solution, and to really understand their needs and understand how to best deliver your solution to them and communicate why you are doing what you're doing.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that, like, as you get through your life sciences education, folks, one thing that you that's why we had the science communication panel 2 days ago, because a lot of times so much of what you're doing is not necessarily how you solve these problems, but how you communicate those solutions as well. Because one thing that's really exciting about entrepreneurship in life sciences and biotech in general is that there's a lot more money going into bleeding edge research, but that means there's also a lot more competition as well. And so as you think about the processes you'd like to solve, as you think about the practicals you think would be useful for the world, and as you think about like kinds of companies you'd like to establish post grad, or even during your time in school, one thing you need to keep in mind is that communication is key. And so I hope you go back. You'll find a link to the science communication panel as well, and sort of think about how you can communicate your ideas as well, because it's one thing to have a brilliant product. It's another thing entirely to have a consistent group of customers who want to utilize that product. And we'll be getting into how to establish that momentarily. But while we're still on the beginning side of this panel, I want to make sure I'm helping people understand what it means, sort of the effort in terms of starting a business like this. And so actually, I want to bring it back to co-founder and CEO of BioCord, Unchit Singh, real fast. Unchit, you over the past year, you've taken BioCord from 40 people to 14,000, while also going through a very rigorous master's program studying metabolism and mitochondria. So out of curiosity, that's one thing our audience is immediately just very concerned about. How on earth can I find balance? Like, I feel like grad school, I feel like my undergrad, I feel like my lab stuff takes up my whole life. How on earth do I find the time to build something on the side there? Because that kind of time management is going to be critical as you lean into becoming an entrepreneur as well. As becoming an entrepreneur just basically means solving every single problem with a potential business, and we'll get into that momentarily as well. But Anshut, what's your process been like over the last year, balancing all the research and studying you have to do with establishing what is ultimately a very successful life sciences community here on Discord?
So yeah, the management thing is big for this, but I'm not a great time manager, and all of the time that I have to find for the various things that I have to do cut into my sleeping time. So I haven't been sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours a night for the past few weeks now, and that's really unhealthy. And I really need to learn a bit more about time management to be able to manage all the different balls that I'm juggling. Talking about how do I manage the research work with Discord? So I think the advantage that I have is it's more of a community and less of a company. So community management aspects do not take up as much time as you would imagine setting up an entire business would take. And BioCord is at a very early stage of the journey of being set up as a proper nonprofit entity. So it's not taking up too much of my time on the business side of things, but being able to study science and being able to share that science on BioCord, I think that's also a part of my learning experience. Because if I can communicate the science that I'm reading and studying every single day, it helps me understand the science better and helps me design experiments in a better way.
Absolutely. And that's a really great way of thinking about it as well, is that you have to understand that on the front end, it may seem like a very huge investment audience, figuring out your processes, figuring out any kinds of products you'd like to develop, while also at the same time, managing your school, your life, everything else. But one thing you should keep in mind is a lot of times these processes turn into things that compound on each other. As you sort of start leaning into a practical that you think you could turn into a real product or a real business, it helps inform everything else you do. It makes you a better researcher. It makes you it makes you a better student. It's one of those things where, like, once you establish the feedback loop of entrepreneurship, that is ridiculous language, but trust me, that's a good metaphor. Once you establish those processes for yourself and those feedback loops, you'll find that everything has a way of compounding into each other. A lot of times in life, something that feels like two problems that are in conflict with each other are actually two problems that help solve each other. So keep that in mind as you think about this. It's one of those things where, like, once you have something that you really feel passionate about on the product side, a lot of these other problems kind of fall into place. But as we get into like the actual mechanics,
I'd like to add a point as well.
Sure, of
I
course.
forgot to mention the contribution of the entire BioCord team that has helped put up this conference, as well as manage the server when I'm too busy to manage the server. Like, people on the server know when I get started with lab, it's almost impossible to get me on Discord. So if it was not for the volunteers, the wonderful volunteers that helped me manage the entire thing, it would not be possible.
No,
And
exactly. That's what, yeah.
I was going to build on what you were saying, Peter. When you mentioned, when you're really passionate about something, I think as you're looking to building something of your own, you get this idea in your head, and you kind of you're playing with it, you're iterating on it in your own mind, and then when it starts to get more concrete, it starts to become almost like an obsession. You can't stop thinking about it. You're going to bed and you're thinking about what could I do better. You're eating breakfast and you're thinking about where do I get started. And so a lot of it will just fall into place when you find the right angle or the right problem you want to solve, and allow that passion to really flourish. And then, like you said, the time management will flow from that, because then the more you think about it, the more you set your priorities, your goals, your next milestones, and then that will kind of help regulate. What are the next steps in the interim that I could do to achieve that end goal. So really, it starts from what you were saying, like having that passion, really identifying what you want to build, and then just running with it.
Exactly. And audience, I think one thing you should keep in mind too is that there are principles in life around momentum. You think they're just a physical process, like if you send a ball rolling down a hill, it'll gradually build up speed, and you think, well, that's just physics. A lot of life works that way too. You will gradually build momentum with everything you do over time as well. Like you if you are genuinely obsessed with the product, genuinely obsessed with trying to solve a problem, every day all that information compounds on itself, and you will get faster at solving individual problems within that business day after day after day after day. Lots of intangible things in life have momentum as well. And so when you're thinking about trying to establish a process or a business, you need to keep that in mind as well. It doesn't get easier over time, but you get better at solving the problems over time. It's just always, a lot of times, the problems become more and more complex. And so those two forces tend to balance each other out. But getting into the actual mechanics of entrepreneurship as well, one thing that our audience is really curious about is sort of making sure that we keep adapting. It's really hard, like other than like the really big problems like climate change, figuring out like more sustainable sustainability, those sorts of things. Like it's really hard to know where the life sciences industry is going to be in the next 10 years, let alone the next 5 years. And so figuring out how you adapt and how you make a business that can sort of survive like an ever-changing landscape, and a landscape whose changes are accelerating rapidly, is really important. And that's why I'm really excited to have Dr. John Moulton from Gene Tools here as well, because Dr. Moulton, you have been building and refining your business over the course of the last 20 years and have managed to make it a sustainable business, despite having a really, really, really complicated product, like genuinely ludicrous, like huge amounts of data in each one of your orders, and just really, really difficult problems to solve on the daily. So Dr. Moulton, I'd love to get your perspective in terms of how you've grown and established the business over the years, and how you've gradually solved all these problems. Like you managed to keep your team really lean and make your process really refined. So I'd love to hear like what the evolution of Gene Tools has been over the years, from the initial establishment of your product to now where you're filling orders as efficiently as possible, because I think it's a really fascinating story. I know it's a really broad question, but let's see if we can't drill down into it.
When I came on board 21 years ago and joined as a partner in the company, we didn't have a product we could ship. The chemistry had been worked out. The founder of the company had invented morpholino oligos and left his initial company, which is now Sarepta Therapeutics, to found a company to bring these to the research market. So one of the first things I did when I came on was to go to a custom-built synthesizer, figure out how the thing works, and get it to make some oligos. We easily could have gone under early. The cash flow situation was terrible. We had a molecule that we thought was suitable for use in cell culture, and with time, we hoped to solve the delivery problem across the cell membrane so it could be used in adult animals as well. But at first, there was a trickle of sales and a lot of bills. About 3 months after I came on board, folks at the Developmental Biology Conference, I think it was a Cold Spring Harbor conference. A fella came in named Steve Ecker, who had used these in zebrafish. Before him, Janet Hiesman had used them in xenopus. They put the morpholinos into the eggs by microinjection, solving the problem of getting them across the plasma membrane. And suddenly the developmental biologists had a tool that allowed them to modulate gene expression conveniently. And we were blindsided. We had no idea that somebody was going to use these in embryos. And that kicked off the business. We had orders coming in very regularly. That solved the initial cash flow, and we began to be able to focus on the problem of how to make them cleanly, reproducibly, at a reasonable cost. And I'm proud to say in 21 years, we haven't raised our prices. We've always managed to find economies out of the production process that's allowed us to compensate for increases in cost. But it's a very software-dependent process. Go ahead.
No, of course, and for me. That's just you making the process more efficient, correct, over time. So like as sort of reagent costs go up, and as people costs go up, you can compensate for that by making the actual procedure of developing these oligos more efficient. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
Yes.
That's incredible. That is absolutely gigantic. When you're thinking about that and communicating that, is it one of those things where you have to be over ambitious in timelines for your consumers, or is it one of those things where how do you communicate that too, and how do you make sure that as you keep developing this process on the fly, not on the fly, but throughout the years, and make sure you keep refining it, how do you communicate those refinements to the consumer as well? Or is it just one of those things where you just fulfill the order and you're done?
We fulfill the order and we're done. The communication about process improvements is all internal, all trying to make things work greased.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's just making sure that you get the work done, and we'll get more into that as we move on here. But that's something really important to keep in mind, folks. It's one of those things you're a scientist. If you are listening to this panel, you have that scientific way of thinking, and so you have to understand that you have a small advantage over other businesses in that you have a constantly iterative way of seeing the world, which a lot of other folks simply do not. Like if you are coming to entrepreneurship from straight up business school, you might have that iterative perspective, but it's very sort of focused on a different pathway that's sort of very well ingrained in a process here, whereas you have a very iterative way of thinking, and that iterative way of thinking is a great way to grow a business. So don't discount your perspective as you start thinking about either being a part of a biotech startup, being a part of a larger research organization, or leaving academia altogether to actually build the future of STEM. Keep in mind that just by being trained very scientifically within the scientific method across your entire undergrad experience, you have a very, very advantageous perspective in terms of becoming an entrepreneur. You have no idea the value you have, especially for these very fast, very agile tech companies. But getting away from these foundational aspects here, did someone want to just add something on top of that?
I was gonna just build on that point a little bit. The edge that you have coming in from a scientific background and applying the scientific process to business. There's actually a whole mantra around this now. Lean startup is all about measurements, and then being able to test a business hypothesis and be able to evaluate that's true. Having an understanding about how to control those experiments is actually something that benefited us a lot. Understanding, what are the factors that you could change to kind of influence the equation, understanding how to set the right metrics, how to measure things properly, how to quantify with statistics and probability, what your success would be what you can do to adapt. Because, like everyone was saying, our industry in life sciences changes all the time. 10 years ago, we had a big, genomics revolution. Who knows what's going to happen in another 10 years or 20 years from now, even next year, being able to be adaptive and then measure the impact of your changes scientifically is actually something that will take you a really long way in growing your business.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that we've not really focused on is that idea of competitive pressure too. Thinking about, you think, oh, what if somebody else comes up with a similar practical? That's actually a really good thing. You want to have a lot, not necessarily pressure, but you want to have a lot of impetus in terms of growing and iterating your process. And so that's why we're really excited to also have Alexi Guzzi here as well. Alexi, you think a lot about on the meta science aspects here. The goal of new science, your organization is to do to life science as entrepreneurs what Silicon Valley did to general tech entrepreneurs. So out of curiosity, what is that kind of competitive landscape you're hoping to construct over at New Science? How do you see the life sciences and biotech landscape right now, and how do you hope to keep refining it and pushing it forward in the future? What does it look like as we get into these very agile, very hard to predict spaces moving forward?
Great. I think I should correct this a little bit. The thing that I want to focus on more is the basic science that will eventually turn into biotech companies and that will eventually turn into therapeutics. But the thing that where I think Silicon Valley can be a big inspiration for science and for biology specifically is in its focus, as you mentioned, on agility, but also specifically on paying attention to individual people and to skills and to abilities of people more than on their credentials or the years of experience or some like external attributes. And this is something that I find. So I talk to a lot of young scientists, and both those who stay in academia and those who go into biotech. And it seems that a lot of them, even those who are incredibly talented and those who have a lot of relevant skills and ideas, find it difficult, and much more difficult than they would have found it if they were doing like software or like tech startups. They find it much more difficult to advance just on the basis of their skills and ideas if they don't have all of the right credentials and all of the right external attributes. And so this is something that I very much look forward to trying to do something about, and to trying to figure out how to enable science to evaluate people, but I could say based on their fundamentals rather than external attributes. This is something that I very much also hope Petri is going to be working towards as well, where investing, being inspired by, because I think there's also a more general sort of mentality of the like East Coast and West Coast in venture capital specifically. And it does seem that there is this more frontier attitude of people who do venture capital on the West Coast. And I am very excited to try to bring this sort of frontier mentality and try to see how we can like sort of grow it in the life sciences and in areas where it's traditionally not been very well represented.
No, exactly. And you kind of bring up like what is ultimately the next step here too, because as the people watching this panel think about, being an entrepreneur, think about, establishing a business, establishing a product, the next step is obviously talent, which is an extraordinarily hard problem to solve right now in biotech because of, the credentialing issue. And so it's trying to figure out folks who can fit best in these companies without necessarily, either not necessarily having like a specific life sciences background or instead just having a skill set that can fit into a life sciences practical. And so I'd love to sort of discuss like how do you find your first couple of hires as you establish these businesses. Like, is it one of those things where like you treat yourself like a technical founder and then just try to find like the non-technical folks who help sell the business? Is it you trying to be just like the life sciences product founder and then find computational folks to build around that? I'd love to, what does that frontier mentality mean? Alexi, let me bring that to you first, and I'm going to bring it to Christopher, Tony, and everyone else on the panel. Alexi, what is your sort of thought process there in terms of growing these businesses? Is it simply trying to expand the talent pool, or is it trying to match, the right kinds of founders together to build the most efficient possible process? I know that's a secretly very broad question, but I'd love your high level thoughts there, man.
Sorry to interrupt here. Speaking of entrepreneurs and developing the next generation of bio startups, I think Dr. Kulisa's point of view would be quite interesting here, because in the time Petri has been active, how have you, like, after Alexi, I would like to hear about Dr. Kulisa's perspective on how the bio entrepreneur space has developed, at least in what he has seen over his career, and where he thinks this will go in the future. Sorry to interrupt, Alexi.
Sure, I'll let Alexi respond, and then I can jump in and after. I think Alexi and I, this is a topic that we often talk about, so I'm sure give a good introduction to my own views.
Great. Yeah, I am actually Not quite sure how much to add besides the things that I already brought up, but it does seem so. One thing that seems striking to me when I observe this like issue of finding talent and the issue of hiring people is that in 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 sciences, when you hire people, it seems that there's a lot more focus on the sort of specific outputs shaped in specific forms that are often difficult to get, like for example, being the first author in a paper. And being the first author on a paper is like, if you don't have it, then you sort of like do not qualify for a lot of things. And it does seem to me that it is very constraining. And if it is very constraining, for example, if you want to get a team to work on a project, and if you want to hire people to work on a project, and you're not giving them the opportunity to get this like right exact correct credential, it becomes quite a bit more difficult to do. And it seems that like this attitude of like the way people build their resumes in this more tech startup scene and in the life sciences scene is very different. And I wonder, one of the things I wonder about is why don't we see more of a like focus on building CV based on like specific skills rather than specific like rather than specific outputs of this like very rigid kind, like just being the first author on a like high impact on a paper published in a high impact journal. Yeah.
No, exactly. That's something really important to keep in mind, and that's something that came up during the science communication panel as well. What we're seeing is like the way that a lot of people within the life sciences industry are incentivized doesn't necessarily translate to building the most efficient processes. Like you're exactly right. Like people are so obsessed with being the first author on a paper. Not only that, but making the most interesting possible paper, that a lot of times a lot of really good science just simply isn't done because all it will give you is valuable data, but it won't give you like an air quotes interesting narrative. Like the pressures you get from the publishing industry and being in academia itself sometimes are counterproductive to science itself. And so how do you shift those incentives towards actually developing the data sets people need to build better processes, which is something we might get into later on in this panel. But I want to stay in this vein of conversation as we think about skill sets and the bio entrepreneur space. So, Dr. Kalisa, I was about to give you a chance to answer, and then I'm going to bring Christopher in shortly thereafter.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover here, but just to give my own kind of point of view on this, I think what we've seen, if you look at the year of 2010 until now, so the past decade in biotech, there's actually about 10x more capital that's become available from investors for that's kind of poured into the coffers of biotech startups. Like there's about 1.6 billion in 2010, and there's about 18 billion in 2020, and the numbers for 2021 are even larger. And in fact, like it's even, I think, 1.5x from 2018. So it's like the rate of growth is only even accelerating. And we just haven't seen the commensurate number of new companies that have formed. Like you would expect, if there was 10x more capital, maybe you'd expect 10x more companies. But actually what's happened is there's maybe a small increase in the number of companies, but it's mostly just a lot more money going into each company. And so the only real kind of way of, and it's the same venture capitalists as well. It's like, it's the same kinds of executives, same venture capitalists. It's like this kind of insular community that's raising more and more money, but really their output is not grown. And so if we think that biotechnology is like such an important lever on so many of the world's problems, I think it behooves us to have as many shots on goal as possible, right? It was not the consensus prediction we were all going to just live, that we're still living through a pandemic, right? And like, thank God we have the technology invested and developed at, BioNTech and Moderna and others that have basically been ready to go and deploy. But, in the case of Moderna, and I won't comment on BioNTech, but Moderna was not designed to be a vaccines company, right? It was like kind of accidentally a vaccines company. And so I think it stands to say that like we just need as many shots on goal as possible. And so what's limiting here becomes talent, right? If you say, well, what constrains the output? It's not the dollars. It's definitely not the technology. We're living through a revolution in so many different fields. And it becomes down to like, who are the people that can start and build these companies? And that's why you see kind of, investors betting on the same people over and over again. And this idea of like pharma executives are the only people that can build these companies. And I think this is something that we've tried to just solve our way around with Petrie. So with Petrie, we brought together the founders of a bunch of iconic bioengineering companies, everything from Beyond Meat to Ginkgo Bioworks, Twist Bioscience, et cetera. And our goal is to have those entrepreneurs multiplexed across first-time entrepreneurs. So if you've never done it yourself, to kind of apprentice and be mentored by the folks who have done it before. But I think that this only goes a small way towards solving the problem. And that's actually why I'm really excited about BioCord in general. And I think like the point about credentialism and biotech is something that we need to escape. And I don't have good solutions about how we can, like, I strongly believe that I've met many people who are 18 years old that were smarter than some of the best graduate students that I knew when I was doing my PhD at MIT and the Broad Institute, which is one of the top genomics institutes in the world. I'm not saying the average, I'm not saying like these are smart people, but there are a lot more 18-year-olds, around the world than there are than people that had the opportunity to get to, to the particular place I was. And also just like the fact that there are so many of these things available online, like BioCord, like people were showing up to MIT as freshmen and having taken the entire undergraduate and graduate curriculum online from edX and WebEx and open courseware at MIT. And I think this is just going to accelerate. So I don't know how to solve this problem in terms of how do we kind of get around credentials. At Petrie, with we've invested in 12 companies, and it is something we put a lot of thought into. How do we grow these companies? And a lot of our thinking does come down towards like test people's actual skills rather than the credentials. Try and create a small project that's compatible like with the work that someone would actually do or predictive of the work that someone actually do, and test them on the actual project rather than looking to see if have they published a paper on this or to Lexi's point, do they have a first author paper on this, et cetera. But that's really not the best idea that we could have. And I don't have better ideas. So if you have better ideas, please like share them, DM me on Twitter. I share them on BioCord, and I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry. Oh, please go ahead. I can speak.
Sorry. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that, one of the things that we could do to really up the talent pool of people who are interested in building companies is to have conferences like this, have panels like this, where we can discuss alternative paths that you could take before you go to graduate school, during graduate school, etc. I think one of the challenges is I know when I was going through grad school, I thought, okay, after this, I'm postdoc, and then I'm going to be a research associate, then I'm going to try to build my own lab. And like, it very seems like you commit to graduate school, and then there's only one trajectory. And a lot of the times, we don't talk about what you could do with the training that you have. Maybe you become an expert in synthetic biology, maybe, and then you see a need, but then you don't know that, hey, you know what, I could apply this and build a company, because it takes a lot of money to start up a biotech company. It takes a lot of commitment as well. And I know that a lot of hospitals and research networks, research universities, they have IP transfer offices that can help you commercialize some of the products, and being able. And I see it in some of my previous institutions that these are being brought more front and center. And I think the hope is that we start to tell our young scientists in training or before they go to grad school, et cetera, that, you know what, you could actually take this and apply it and build a commercial entity out of this. And it's not just about getting a paper, to kind of think multidimensionally and see that there's alternative pathways. I think that will really start to increase the number of scientists who are looking into the entrepreneurship route and having this conversation that we're having right now across communities like BioCord. The hope is to have more entrepreneurial spirit and young scientists start to emerge. And and on the topic of credentials, I actually have a question for Dr. Tony Costa. Is when you're looking at a founding team, right? Does having first paper authorships or having multiple PhDs in your founding core team influence how you make a decision about the merits of their business, right? And I think that's something that personally I'm very curious about as well. And as you look into financing companies, does that play a role in your decision making?
In the spirit of being anti-credentialist, I'd appreciate if people just call me Tony rather than Dr. Klesser or et cetera. But yeah, I mean, I think about a third. I have to actually look at the exact numbers, but I think about a third of the businesses we invest in are run by founders, a founder that did not have a PhD. In fact, you know, there's one that's run by someone without any scientific training at all. And that founder actually educated himself by taking courses that were available at various universities that were either online or just open to the public, in the kind of areas where he wanted to build his business. And so I think for us, like, I mean, we tend to spend a lot of time with people before we decide to invest in them. And like, you know, we try not to carry the bias. I mean, of course, like our network tends to select for people that come from graduate school because we spend most of our time at universities. But when people reach out, I mean, we do try and like spend a lot of time with them and get to know them. And I think as long as people can articulate their ideas clearly and they are kind of stand up to the experts of the field, like then, you know, that's like even a stronger marker of that person's probability of success than if they even did very well to do that with the credential, right? Because the fact that they can do that without the credential, it doesn't tend to be the norm because it's so rare, right? But I think in the cases where that has happened, I was like jumping out of my seat.
Yeah, I think that was one of like the fears, because I myself, like I had left my PhD to build the company, and that was one of the decisions I had to wrestle with. Like, should I just finish up what I was doing and then build the company? But then the cognitive dissonance becomes, what if you wait and then you finish your degree and then it's too late, you've missed your opportunity? And I think some of the times we wrestle as academics going through the process is, you know, can I live with myself if I miss this opportunity? And we tend to like opt for, okay, let's take the safer route. And I think that's one of the messages that we should encourage our young entrepreneurs is that, you know, now is the time. If you have an idea, be bold and kind of take that to the next level, because there are investors like Tony who will kind of judge the business merits purely on the business merits. And then if you believe that you can build the best product in startup space and entrepreneurship, doesn't really matter about credentials. It's just, you know, best product wins. If you solve the problem and you're the best in the world that'll do it, you'll come out on top. So yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this because this is really close to heart too. And I'd love to see more of my colleagues who kind of didn't end up taking the leap of faith to be, you know, have that impetus to really take that jump, because there are people in our community that would support that vision, right?
Yep. And talking about this anti-credential, this conversation, so I think it's quite important right now that especially with communities such as BioCord and BioDojo popping up, there are more people who have the opportunity and the experience, the more opportunity and the ability to be able to experience such kind of conversations, because I do not think a lot of people would be able to attend such a conversation if it was not for their academic credentials, unless communities like BioCord and others existed. So I want to ask a question to John. How do you think, compared to say the early 90s, how much do you think the bio-entrepreneurship space has changed over time? Like, I'm sure it has become easier right now to set up a company in the bio space, but what are the unique challenges that still plague the industry today that were the same back earlier in the 90s?
It's still talent. It's still finding the right people.
Mm-hmm. So if talking about talent, do you think being able to expose a lot of the younger audiences to such conversations and such conferences and various other resources on the internet, is it helping sift out the talent better?
Well, it's giving people a clearer idea of whether this is something they want to do. And certainly you have people coming out of college and sometimes going into industry and hating it, and others that feel like this is what they were born to do. And giving some early exposure to industry is different from what was going on. You know, back when I was in graduate school, I took some summer jobs in industry. I started getting a taste that way, but in school, it was about being on the academic track and nobody talked to you about industry. I think that aspect is changing. And I think that the online platforms are helping to get more of the industrial perspective out and let people know there's options.
Yeah, I was going to ask Dr. Moulton the same question. You know, like I know when I was first looking at research jobs when I was in undergrad, there weren't like as many postings for, you know, working at like, you know, in vitro gen or something like that. do students have to go directly to these companies to figure out job postings, or like is there kind of a medium where they can get recruited from? Maybe if it's co-op, like do biotech companies offer co-op positions, those kind of things that students can look for during their undergrad?
I think in the biotech hubs, that's more common.
Mm-hmm.
We are far from any biotech hub in the middle of Western Oregon. We have universities nearby, but not a lot of other biotech companies. So it's hard to. Another thing that's a little different from the credentialism approach to hiring. We're a company that has a lot of trade secrets. All of that work we've put into developing how to make our morpholinos quickly and efficiently and inexpensively, and in order to keep the price down, that has meant that although we have a compound which is off patent, it's very hard to make it competitively with us. And so in some companies like that, it's hard to take interns because everybody that you have come in and train is learning tricks that could give a competitor an advantage. For that reason, we try to hire local whenever we can, and networking becomes extremely important. If you know somebody who could probably fill a slot and something comes available, talk to them before you put a job announcement out. So different sort of approach. And unfortunately, I would love to be hosting interns because I think the educational aspect of biotech is really important, getting the next workforce ready. But in our position as a manufacturer, it's not practical. It's too risky.
And that's a really great way to examine sort of like the different tensions you have to think about as you establish these entrepreneurial processes. It's not necessarily that, it's there's a limited talent pool. It's that every hire can be risky, especially if you have like a process you have to keep really close to the chest. Some other companies might not have this issue. So it's one of those things, audience, you have to think about as well, which is why, as always, the best way to hedge your bets is the networking side of thing. Just, being in a community like BioCord, get to know as many people as possible, do what you can to like figure out what kinds of problems they're trying to solve and think about how you slot into that. And I think a really great way to put a bow on this conversation around talent is to think about it in this way, because when I'm looking at the questions coming in both on BioCord and in Zoom, I'm seeing a lot of people who don't necessarily think of themselves as entrepreneurs, but see themselves as, part of one of the cogs in the machine. And as somebody who's interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs in the software space, one thing I've seen is that the number one indicator that you will start your own company is if you're part of like a high growth startup as well. And so I think one good entryway here is to help our audience think about how they can sort of slot into their first role in the biotech industry. So Christopher, let me actually ask you this first. I know, you're still very much in the seed stage. You just hit the Google Cloud Accelerator phase of things. But as you look forward to building your business, what kind of roles are you thinking about hiring for? And what kind of talent are you thinking about right now for BioBox Analytics? Like if I am somebody trying to establish myself in STEM right now, what kinds of skills should I be trying to develop so that like if I run into Christopher Lee at this very critical inflection point, I have the best skill set necessary to like strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. Like, what are you looking for right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I talk about this with my team all the time. So in terms of like where we're trying to fill roles is obviously as a software company, as a tech company, we're looking for engineers, software engineers. And, the challenge that happens is when you're in a very specialized space like ours, working with genomics, working with biotech, synthetic biology, whatever it is, right? It's easy to learn code and how to build like, a website or a backend server. What's really hard is to build something that's like, okay, figure out how to show the information about this gene and epigenetics. And it's like, what's that? An engineer is not going to understand a certain, very specialized knowledge. So finding engineers who have a biology background. I mean, finding good engineers to begin with is already like extremely hard. Now try to find a good engineer who knows like genomics. It's like almost impossible, right? So I think for life sciences people who are looking into the space, looking to work in tech companies, to have that programming skill as well, to kind of learn those skills as on the side, because it's really hard to teach an engineer 10 years of biology, right? It's easier to teach someone who has a training in biology and teach them how to become a good software engineer. And that's kind of like how we look at bringing new people on into the team. We definitely like to have some biology experience, and because that really kind of helps us work together to tackle our problem. Not that it's absolute requirement, but it definitely does make things easier. So kind of looking at it from the other angle, as a new student going in, either you're in high school, you're in undergrad right now, to pick up skills that are a little bit outside of just biology, a little bit outside just sciences, will go a long way to help you develop your career in any industry that you end up wanting to take. And I think right now, the something that you could do by yourself, all you need is internet access and a computer, is programming. I would encourage anyone to really start thinking about programming. And yeah.
No, and that's one of those things, like that's a really great skeleton key that kind of unlocks a lot, especially within like the amount of potential that's going to exist within bioinformatics and computational biology with all of that. Keep that in mind, audience. Just be careful as somebody who wants to stay in STEM. If you study programming, sometimes you can get sucked into an adjacent industry as well. So keep it close to the chest and make sure that you stay true to your biotechnology and biotech roots, so you don't accidentally end up being somebody who's interviewing on the marketing technology side as opposed to within academia. The gravity is very strong. Stay centered, folks. But let me expand on that question, Tony. Let me bring that to you, but with a more expanded perspective. When you're helping the companies in your portfolio scale, like what are the kinds of skills you're looking for from a broader perspective for, like, people within the first 10 to 20 hires of these kind of companies that like somebody coming fresh out of school might slot into well? Like, are there any kinds of skills? Again, I'm asking you on a very broad scale here, but like from your perspective, are there any other skills that people in this audience can keep in mind as they try to make sure that they expand their competitive edge to try to get in on these early stage startups, so they can get a sense of what it means to be a part of a very fast, agile, entrepreneurial company? Like, how are you thinking about that in terms of helping your companies grow? What kinds of skills are you hunting for?
I mean, I would probably just second what Christopher said. I'm not sure I have much to add. I think, we always think I always grew up in a culture that kind of divided like the wet lab and then, wet lab is like where you do experiments, and then the dry lab, though, like I think is a less popular of a term, being, the people that are doing computational work. And I would just like to, Daphne Kohler, who's the founder of Incitro, likes to talk about like damp biologists. So I think just think of yourself like a damp biologist.
I like that
but
term.
other than that, I mean, just do what's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't try and over optimize on anything other than what's interesting to you. You don't stand a chance of being very good at something in a competitive market unless like you're actually really interested in it.
No, that's a really great way of thinking about it. And so, audience, that's one thing to keep in mind as well. Like, there's so much more money going into the space right now that eventually it's going to turn into going into more companies as well as a lot of these ventures become successful, and capital sees that success are going to very much expand. So you're going to see kind of the momentum shift from like, while there's a lot of money right now going into like the same number of companies, you're going to see that expand as pressure increases on different avenues for success. And so rather than think about what the skill set is, focus on what you enjoy the most, because what you enjoy the most is what you're going to have the most momentum towards. And you'd be surprised, like, just because you enjoy something, you think, well, it's easy or it's not valuable. You are very wrong. You'd be very surprised just how valuable the things you find interesting are to a potential company or to a potential process. But thinking about that and making sure that, like, we're helping establish, the next sort of like generation of life sciences professionals within the entrepreneurial space. Alexei, let me bring you back in. I'd love to hear more about your summer fellowship and how you're thinking about solving this over at New Science. Just take me through like the processes you're developing in terms of helping develop talent. I'd love to hear about your summer fellowship and everything else you're doing to sort of like, again, smash down these credentialist walls and make sure we're expanding access for people within this space, if that's chill.
Great. So the summer fellowship that we're going to have will focus on giving young scientists the opportunity to work on whichever projects they're most excited about, regardless of the opportunities presented by them to them by their normal research environment, whether they're grad students or advanced undergrads, or perhaps, as Tony mentioned, really, really smart 18-year-olds. And the way we're thinking about this is that we sort of basically expect to like spend a lot of time like talking to people, and like again, I think as Tony mentioned, like make actually looking at the things that people can do, and like looking at and like seeing the example projects that they can do, and like testing people a lot more actively than you would by just naively like looking at the resume and hoping to like figure out exactly how qualified the person is just based on the resume. So this is the approach that we're taking.
No, I love that. And I think an audience, if you want to check that out, that's over at newscientist.org/summer-fellowship. I'll be leaving a link to that in the comments themselves. It's a summer fellowship for 2022, and it's actually a really awesome process in terms of like getting you prepared for the next steps as you sort of like establish your research, your opportunities, and everything else. I'll leave a link for that both actually just within Discord itself. So check us out over at discord.gg/biology within the summer conference questions channel. I'll have that link there as well. But that does kind of bring us to the end of our hour here. I don't want to take up anyone's morning too much. So everyone, I've really appreciated your time. I just want to kind of go around the horn and get final thoughts. Alexei, since we just had sort of like the final point from you, any other final thoughts from you as we sort of like think about, you know, establishing ourselves within the space or becoming entrepreneurs? Is there anything else you want to have our audience keep in mind as they develop their skills for a rapidly changing biotech industry?
I, I think, yeah, I would again like to sort of add to the point that Tony made about like people studying studying biology on online platforms, and it does seem to me that essentially one of the things that it's are often limited by is by their perception that there is not enough opportunity to learn things, or that they're sort of locked into whether they were born not in the right place, or that they were not provided with opportunity. It seems that in this in our current year, it does seem possible to just go on the internet and learn a lot more than you would naively expect by going to either edX or MIT OpenCourseWare, and not only learn but also to do projects that would put you on the radar even if you're not sort of the traditionally looking person who people usually expect to see and expect to hire. And I think, and participating in a community like BioCord is also sort of a really unique opportunity to just get such a direct way to access people who are also interested in these things from all over the world, and who might have expertise and who might be able to help. And yeah, so to people who are listening to us who are in this community, just to keep doing the thing that they're doing, and probably just do it even more than they're doing it right now.
Precisely. It's one of those things where, like, as a life sciences student, you kind of have a very unique perspective in terms of you understand that life is a deeply iterative process that finds the most efficient paths and just keeps going down them. You know, life it may be incredibly complex at the molecular level. Life may be a little inscrutable at times, but at the end of the day, life just works and it just keeps working. Remember that you are a process of DNA replication that has been an unbroken chain of replication for 4 billion years. And look at all of the complexity that has been born out of just like the initial circumstances of your biochemistry. Keep that in mind. Sometimes you just need to focus on what works for you specifically, and that's how you're going to find the most efficient processes and the most efficient ways you can contribute to an organization. Remember, companies are made out of people, and people are made up out of biochemical processes, right? So in a lot of ways, they mirror cell biology, and that's a metaphor for you to think about how you can fit into these organizations as well. Think about the way that you make these pathways the most efficient, and you'll be able to find your place. And I think it's a really beautiful way to put a bow on that. So Alexei, I really appreciate your perspective. I want to keep going around the horn and getting more of these final thoughts, though. So Christopher Lee, any final thoughts from you? Like, again, thank you so much for your perspective from the the entrepreneurial side. If I want to hear more about BioBox, where should I go as well? And how should I be thinking about this moving forward in terms of establishing myself as someone in this bio entrepreneur space?
Yeah, and just to wrap everything up, thanks for having me here today. It was a pleasure being here. And to find out more about us and what we do, you can find us at biobox.io. And if you're a grad student or looking in high school looking to jump into sciences, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to learn about your work and learn about your ambitions and see if there's a way that there's something that we can contribute to your success, either in your research work or just to have a conversation with other entrepreneurs in the space. I think if I could summarize, I think in life sciences in our industry is the most exciting place to build companies. Like I could be biased, but we're solving the coolest problems. Okay, we're not solving you don't want to build another ride-hailing app. You don't want to build another e-commerce kind of site. Like those kind of things, in my opinion, are quite boring, right? But the problems that we solve, like Dr. Moulton's lab, building morpholinos, those kind of cool technologies that only very, very few people have the opportunity to tackle, but have massive impact on public health research, on society, on just the development of our scientific community. Like we're in a very, very unique position to just wake up every day, go to work, and love what you're doing because it's tickling that scientific curiosity of yours, but you also get to build something for yourself and solve important challenges. And I think those of us in life sciences, we need to understand that there is something like there's something that we are uniquely positioned to do, and to really kind of take that advantage of that and run with it and take that leap of faith, because there are people in our community like Tony who will back you if you show them a good product, show them a good business, right? There are investors out there who will really just support you and your vision, and for us to start thinking and talking about that more.
Keep honing that vision, folks. I love that perspective. And again, audience, I know we're kind of jumping through the links really fast here, so I will be dropping them into the summer conference questions channel over on BioCord as well for all these links that I'm just heaving at you right now. But as I roll through the final thoughts, we mentioned Dr. Moulton. So one thing that I'm actually seeing in the questions here, let's just say I happen to be a life sciences professional who happens to be, within the area of Western Oregon. Any way I can hit up genetools.com and find a way to fit into your organization to help sort of figure out your talent problem, just out of curiosity?
You can always talk to me. And this is how it happens. It's about networking. It's about communicating with people and finding out what they can do.
Awesome. And audience, keep that in mind. Go for it, Dr. Moulton. Forgive me.
One thing I wanted to add into an earlier conversation, you said people should be doing what they like and pursuing what interests them. Absolutely true. That the enthusiasm is what drives growth. But the other thing is, do it the hard way. If you need to take a physics class, go over into engineering and take it with calculus. If you need to take biochemistry for biologists, why not go to the chemistry department and just do the year series? This is the chance to build the tools, and the broader that you can do that now, the more problems you're already equipped to think about.
Precisely. It's all about building as broad of a base as possible. You have no idea. That's the best part about the sciences, right? Because you will go deep into the biochemical rabbit hole, and you'll find something from geology that absolutely blows your mind. It's all about building that interconnectivity and building a really strong skill set that gives you the ability to solve lots of complicated problems down the road. So keep that in mind as well. And if you are here at this conference right now, congratulations. You have an edge on over thousands of other life sciences students who are still trying to find the right path forward by being a part of this community and developing your network. So if there's people in this server who are doing things that you think are cool, feel free to ask them questions. Discord is magical. If you want to hear more about how to be an animator, feel free to hit me up, but don't go down the communication path. Stick to STEM, stick to solving the problems, and actually save the world rather than being somebody who just talks about it. But moving on down the line here. So Tony, let me get final thoughts from you too. Like any final thoughts from you? Like if I want to hear more about Petrie, where should I go? Like anything that our audience here should think about as they move forward and keep developing their processes for developing themselves as entrepreneurs moving forward?
Well, you can find us at petrie.bio, and you could follow me or Petrie on Twitter. Post all those links. But my final thought would be for people that are, if there's one thing that I feel like people could take away from what I have to contribute, it's develop a taste for what problems to work on. I think like the earlier in your career that you can do this, it will qualitatively change the course of your career. And I think there are a number of ways you can develop this. One is through like reading the biographies or writings of like great scientists that you respect and thinking about how they chose what problems to work on. You'll find that more often than not, people who became famous and won Nobel Prizes or were great entrepreneurs or whatever, really kind of the market or the problem that they chose to work on was more important than their own particular skills. That being said, they're usually some of the most talented people in the world, but it's certainly not true that they could have like decided to work on consciousness and that we'd all understand consciousness suddenly, right? You have to develop a choice, a taste for what problems to work on. And so read the writings, like the personal writings of great scientists, read the biographies of great scientists or great entrepreneurs. And then also like the industry is very flat. So like don't be afraid to just like cold email or cold message people and reach out and like ask them how they think about problems and tell them your thoughts about what you're working on and ask for their help and their feedback, whether they like to challenge you and to affirm you, etc. So I think like the earlier you can kind of get into that practice, the larger kind of order of magnitude difference in your career output it will have. So that's my kind of parting piece of thoughts.
Precisely. It all compounds over time. And one thing, too, audience, keep that in mind as well. It's a really great lens to view yourself as you develop in your career. Life is not necessarily about answering questions. It's about finding the right questions to answer. You have a scientific process built into the way you think about the world. Therefore, if somebody asks you a question, odds are you're going to find either a good answer or at least a path to the right answer. And so your job as somebody trying to figure out their way in this new industry is not to think about answering whatever questions are thrown at you, but finding the right questions to answer and figuring out those things that you are passionate about. And if you find those spaces that you are very, very interested in and have a lot of momentum, sometimes the world kind of catches up to you and you build these processes that become really important to the industry. So I love having that perspective. And audience, I really want you to keep that in mind as you think about how to develop your niche within this industry. But to really put the final bow on it here, I just want to get final thoughts from CEO and co-founder of BioAccord, Unchit Singh. Unchit, man, this has been a great panel, an incredible conference. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. Any final thoughts from you before we go ahead and read the credits here, man? It's been an absolutely brilliant time.
Yeah, so I've learned immensely from this panel as well, and thanks to all the panelists here, because all of them have been instrumental in BioAccord's success. John has been an active member of BioAccord, and he has been helping members with the various questions on biology that they have. And Chris and his team at BioBox have been on BioAccord since last year, and they have participated in other BioAccord events, and they have been fostering the conversation in the bioinformatics space. Tony has been a part of BioAccord recently, and he generously accepted to be a part of this panel, and I thank you for that. And Alexei has been a long time supporter of BioAccord, and he has been probably the largest, the single largest person who has supported BioAccord financially through all of this, and thank you for that. So I believe going forward, having more grassroots communities spreading the knowledge and sharing the experiences is going to help immensely for the bioentrepreneur space, because more people are being exposed to ideas, more people are being able to express their ideas in better ways. So I believe having these conversations is important, and I'm glad to be able to facilitate this.
Awesome. And audience, again, thank you so much for all your amazing questions and all the amazing commentary you've had both here in Zoom as well as within Discord itself. We'll have a recording for this pretty much published immediately after this, and I encourage you to check it out, review what we went over here today. I'll be sending links to every single panelist shortly after this. But in the meantime, our next talk is going to be in about 45 minutes. We're going to have Dr. John Brender on computational protein design. So audience, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your amazing questions. Panelists, thank you so much for your time. And as always, everyone, we'd like to leave you with peace, love, and incremental growth. Everyone be well. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Talk to y'all soon.